Marc Cuban. How you doing, sir?
Good, ET. How you doing, my guy?
Oh, I'm good, man. Thanks for coming on the Rematch with Fly TV and BasketballNews.com. I really appreciate you taking out the time.
Anytime. I got you.
A lot of people don't know that, our connection and how far we go back, because it's funny because someone just recently said this to me and I was like, yeah, I guess a lot of people don't know that, but I was your first pick. That you made, the first draft pick, right? And then the first pick. So then we had, Courtney Alexander, then we had Eduardo Najera prior to Mexico, and then Donnell Harvey. So we were the first class, that you ever drafted after you took over in 2000.
And I got a picture of all four of you guys and me in my office from that very first time y'all came into Dallas. So that was fun.
I remember. It's funny because after when you picked us up from the draft and you took us there, took us to Dallas, and we were all in our suits, and you wanted to show us the new arena. It was in construction, and so we was there. I was like, man, I'm getting dust all on my nice suit. You know what I mean? But you were so happy, so proud, so excited, like a kid in the
kitchen. Man,
you was all the way excited.
Well, I was always fired up back then, boy. It was crazy. It was my first real season, right? And my first full season, owning the Mavs, and so it was crazy. I think back to those days all the time, and just how crazy it was.
No, it was great, and that was a special group. And we had a lot of veteran leadership there. So I was young coming in, and we had of course Dirk and Steve Nash, and we had Michael Finley and Greg Butner and G. Trent, Sean Bradley, Christian Laettner. Those are a lot of vets. I was kind of watching how they do everything. That was a good group of guys.
It was a great group of guys, man, and that's what turned us around, right? That's how we got back on the train to winning, and so you guys helped lead the way.
Oh no, that was great. Now I got to ask you this question. It's basketballnews.com, so I'm technically supposed to be focusing on basketball, even though I talk about a whole lot of other stuff. But I got to ask you this. Do you see in Luka and Porzingis as having the potential, not comparing, but having the potential to reach a level of Dirk Nowitzki?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're different, right? Dirk was a scorer first, where Luka and a pure shooter. Whereas Luka's not a pure shooter yet, but he does everything else. He can score, but he does more, right? And the game has changed a lot since Dirk first came in, or left even a couple of years ago, because now, back in the day, you'd want a point guard setting up Dirk, right? We'd put Dirk on the elbow and have all kinds of action off of him, or he'd run the pick and roll with Jason Terry or whoever. But now you want your star being able to bring the ball up and get you into the action, and because there's so many shooters on the court, be able to take it to the rim and finish or create for others. And so Luka has the ability to do all those things. And as his shot improves, I mean, there's no limit to what he can accomplish.
Oh, I definitely agree. So I got to ask you, because Steve Nash was there, when I was there, and, I kind of look at them. So for a while, I just interviewed Jeff Green, and I asked him what the Thunder could have been if they kept all those guys together, if they kept, Durant and James Harden, and Westbrook, all them together. So I got to ask, what do you think could have been if Steve Nash and Dirk kind of stayed together their entire career?
You have to really rub it in, don't you?
I just got to ask.
That's my biggest mistake ever. Not even close, my biggest mistake ever. He had been injured the year before, and his minutes were declining, and our doctor was like, he may have some issues. And Coach, Nelly was like, he may have some issues. And so we made him what we thought was a great offer, but then Phoenix came in and just beat that offer. And I'll never forget, because he called me up and he goes, they offered me more than Mike Bibby. Mike Bibby had just gotten a big contract. And I have it down on this calendar thing in my office still at the arena. I refuse to move it. It's still there where it says Nash, Mike Bibby money. And my biggest mistake ever. And Nash hated me for a long time because of it. Oh my God. Yeah. Hate may be too strong a word, but I think we're back in it now. Yeah.
Really? But y'all are good now, though. We're
good now. Yeah, we're good now.
Okay, well, that's good to hear.
I think we are. At least I think we hung out a little bit.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, that's good. Well, listen, we have, exchanged messages, for the past few weeks, ever since everything has kind of happened. And, it's been an eventful summer. There's been a lot of stuff going on. The NBA players, went on strike after Jacob Blake was shot 7 times. We watched George Floyd, murdered by, Officer Derek Chauvin. Is that his name? Chauvin, who was like kneeling on his neck, you know what I mean, for 8 minutes. We watched Ahmaud Arbery, be hunted down, and we watched, we got so many different cases. I want to know, first of all, how did they affect you personally? Like, what was your response at seeing, Breonna Taylor, seeing all the different cases that happened? What impact did they have on you?
George Floyd had the biggest impact because that was just straight out murder with everybody watching, and that was just incredible to me to see a man die on a video camera while people watched, while there were police officers around, where there were people taping it. And it was just like, it just hurt. And it didn't make any sense to me at all. I mean, to give you an honest answer, some of the others didn't have as much of an impact to me because it wasn't as personal to me as it may be to you or to other African Americans. Right. But it did contribute to the understanding, right? Because when lots of people come out and say, well, it's not as big a problem as they're making out, and then there's just one time after another time after another time after another time where just African American men and women now are just, it just seems like they're being hunted. And so, George Floyd really hit me hard, and just made me just a lot more aware and a lot more sensitive to the issue, and a lot more, wanting to have an impact and wanting to try to help where I could.
And what was your response to seeing the NBA's response? A lot of the players have been using their platforms to really speak out and bring light to this issue.
I think it's great. Okay. No, I'm very supportive because look, every generation or every couple generations has moments in time that are defining elements, defining actions of those generations. We look back at Martin Luther King and the marches and, so many different things and speeches that really were defining acts that really led to a lot of change with civil rights. And then here we are almost 60 years later, and a lot has changed, but not enough. And so this really felt like it was a chance to have an impact and leave a lasting impression, and most importantly, start to move towards change. And because it felt that way, it really made it clear that this was bigger than basketball, and that because we have our players with, the biggest platform of any athletes in the country, and in many cases the world, it made perfect sense to use those platforms to try to change something that really needs to be changed, to really have an impact on racism, to really have an impact on police reform. So I was proud of them. I'm very supportive, and recognizing, like you and I have talked, that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Definitely. And so and the way that we started communicating a little bit more again, I wrote a piece in The Guardian, and it was titled "Words Aren't Enough. Sports team CEOs must use their influence to affect change." And so in the piece, I was calling on people like yourself, CEOs. I don't call y'all owners. We talked about that before, but we CEOs like Clay Bennett in Oklahoma, Steve Ballmer and Jeannie Buss in LA, James Dolan in New York, Mick Arrowson in Miami, really to use their collective power to really push for change even more. Because I was seeing all the things that was happening, and it was great. But then it was like after George Floyd, it almost seemed like the police got more aggressive. You saw more cases coming out and more, and so I was like, okay, change isn't happening fast enough. And what I like about you didn't take it personally. You didn't get offended by my words and my article, but you messaged me and we started talking about it. Talk to me a little bit about some of your reactions from it.
Yeah, I mean, like I told you, I don't think we have as much influence as you think we do. I wish we did. I wish we could go to politicians. I wish we could go to the president and just say, well, the president may be put aside as a different beast, but, to go to our politicians and just say, look, this is wrong, let's do A, B, or C. And, but the reality is I don't have that influence. If I did, there's 100 things I would try to impact and 100 things I would try to change. In addition to racism, in addition to police reform, there's so many, just housing and food shortages and kids not getting educations. There's 1,000 things that need change. I just don't have the type of influence that and other owners I don't think do either, that you suggested that we need to have. And it's just the reality.
So let me ask you this. So let me read a little bit about what I said to talk about a little bit, specifically. So I said, sentiments of support and solidarity were a good start, but it's a time for, the billionaires in control of sports teams to wield their power to bring about tangible changes in their communities. So this is what I suggested. I said, what if NBA CEOs took proactive roles in their respective cities and pressured police departments to move towards specific reforms and more police accountability? And I said, it's not as if men such as Marc Cuban or Mickey Arison in Miami are lacking in clout in the cities where their teams play. They are billionaires, not millionaires like the players who have been doing an amazing job protesting, but billionaires with a B, which is a whole different level of influence. And then more specifically, I said, so what if the NBA and team CEOs use their influence to pressure cities to threaten to cut the funding of police departments if they didn't adopt tangible police reform and police accountability measures? And I said, I bet you would see results as immediate as what you saw in Washington with the now Washington football team. And the what I'm referencing is how, Dan Snyder was not going to change the name regardless. He made it very clear. But then you saw FedEx say, well, if you don't change the name, you're going to lose us as a sponsor. And then all of a sudden, he saw the light. Now it was changed. And I also relate that to Donald Sterling. Donald Sterling was Donald Sterling for a very long time. I mean, it was very well known who he was. He had the what do you have? The record for the most discrimination cases against him in LA that's for a decade. But then you saw sponsors pulling out after that tape came out and everything like that.
You're saying it the other way, right? You're saying you can influence the owners, right, more than we can influence the politicians, whether they're local or national.
No. I'm saying so you in Dallas, you know what I mean? I'm saying Clay Bennett in Oklahoma, the places where you are, where the team is, where you go to events and have different dealings with this certain level of circles, to use your influence to be able to, convince the city then to say, okay, you have to have this police reform or some type of measure of police reform, or and that it was just a suggestion.
Well, I'll tell you exactly what I did. I don't know if I said this in our messaging. I met with the Dallas chief of police, and I've got a great relationship with the police.
Right.
So I don't know if you maybe I messaged it, but like after 7/7/16, where the 5 officers in Dallas were killed, we worked very closely. I paid for overtime for officers to add services in Oak Lawn. Particularly after the Pulse shooting in Orlando, there was a lot of activity and a lot of what's the right word, violence in and around Oak Lawn to LGBT community. So I paid for overtime there. And then after Chief Brown left, we hired him at the Mavericks. I hired him to work on programs to try to connect kids to have better relationships with officers. And then he left last year to take on another job. But, that gave me the relationship to talk to Chief Hall, the chief of police. Okay. And we had a conversation. Now, defund police can mean a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. I'm a big believer in disrupt police, because I think the challenge is not so much police funding, even though that's part of it. The challenge is that we have all these different stakeholders trying to have an impact on community, and it's all disorganized. Okay. And the police try to do too much, right? Yeah. So you've got the police trying to do things that, they have community programs, which on the surface sound great. Let's get to know kids better and connect them with the police. Well, hospitals have community programs. Churches and synagogues and mosques have community programs. Schools have community programs. The city and the county have community programs. Charities have community programs. So you have these 20 different constituencies trying to all do the same thing to make communities safer, to do these things called, I can't believe the right phrase, but they're doing these things to try to make the communities healthier, the communities healthier and safer and better educated, but they don't work together. So what I said to the chief of police we need to get you connected with all these other organizations so that you can take that money out of your budget because you're being asked to do things that you're not really great at, which is going through and offering these community services, and have that money go towards, organizing all these other groups so they work as one unit so that we can really have an impact. Because the whole goal is to make these communities not just safer, but you make them safer by, you make them even more safe by improving their education, by improving their health care, by improving their housing circumstances, by making it so they don't go hungry and kids get fed and there's daycare. All these things go to being the social determinants of health. That's the phrase I was trying to think of, that make communities safer. And that all ties back to the issues with the police department. And what I told them again was, there's things that no organization can be great at everything. None. Right? And the police are trying to do too many things when they need to focus on the 2 or 3 things that their community needs from them that they can be good at and get good at that. And then when you talk to them about that, and then you start saying, okay, well, what's the next step? Then they start talking about the politics of it. Nobody wants to see their budget reduced, right? But I had this conversation with them, and they said they were going to take a look at it. Never heard back really in any depth other than they're looking at it. But at the same time, I also had the conversation. I'm like, look, on a basketball team, we know who the knuckleheads are, and you try to limit the knuckleheads, right? You've had teammates that you knew were crazy. You played on one team where half the team went nuts, right? Right. And so you know who the knuckleheads are. And I said, in your police department, do you know who the knuckleheads are? And she's like, of course. I'm like, well, why can't you get rid of them?
Right.
And she goes, you already know the answer. The unions, or in Dallas, it's not so much a union. There's associations that do everything possible to protect them. And then there's, they've got these immunity issues where they're not, as much at risk. And so there's all these different elements that make it a very in-depth and difficult issue to address. And that's not meant to make excuses, but those are the conversations I'm having, and when I talk to them, and, it looks like we're going to get a new police chief in Dallas because Chief Hall is resigning, I think, in November. Then we'll have the conversations again. But I think, again, you and I have talked a lot about how sometimes the narrative changes everything, right? People end up believing one narrative versus another, and that makes it difficult to get things done. I think part of the challenge is, while defund the police sounds really good, disrupt the police is what's really needed. You need to change the game so that communities can be made safer in a way that communities want to be policed, as opposed to just saying, you know what, let's just cut it out and reformulate it from ground up.
See, the problem, though, is, and we talked about this a little bit in our messaging, the problem is, people who are dedicated to misrepresenting what the message really is. People know the difference between the word defund and abolish. They're not synonyms. They're two very different words.
No, you're right. People do know the difference, right? But that's not the narrative, and that's the challenge. That's what you face when you try to get things done.
And that's true. And so, but for instance, and I use myself as an example. I don't have the clout that you have in Dallas, but I have a relationship in Syracuse, right? So a lot of things happened in Syracuse last semester, and a lot of bad things. So I have a meeting with the DPS chief. And so I'm going to meet with them. I'm going to have a town hall with him, but then I'm going to have a different things where I make suggestions. I talk about the police hiring, the way that they have police accountability, what they are actually doing if they find a bad apple, how they're protected, how we can better implement different things so there can be trust within the students. Because right now, the Black and brown students do not trust DPS on campus. Right, they do not, and they have very good reason not to. So making that inference right now say in Dallas police, I mean, after, Boston John happened and all these different things happened, a lot of the community in Dallas don't trust the Dallas police departments and have reason to. So a lot of times people need to know, what are the measures that are being taken for police accountability, for the bad apples that you mentioned.
Let me jump in, right? Because a lot of that, so as a business guy, I put on my business hat and I say, okay, let me get to the bottom of the problem. When there's I've had organizations that have had problems, and how do you get to the bottom of it, right? More often than not, it starts with culture, and then you look to see what what the issues are within that culture that are creating challenges and creating problems and creating the people that aren't doing what's in the employee handbook, aren't living up to the ideals.
Right.
Because when you have, I think there's 3,000 people in the Dallas Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
When you have 3,000 people, that's hard to manage. When you have and within those 3,000 police, I don't know how many active duty officers there are at different levels, but just the nature of that business is hard. And the reason I bring this up is not to make an excuse for anybody,
okay.
right? The idea is that when you're looking from change on the outside and trying to ask the questions to drive change on the inside, you need to ask the right questions.
I agree.
Because it's not that what you're saying isn't right. Of course it is. The problem is, and what we've seen time and time again over decades,
mm-hmm.
is that they already know how to answer those questions just to buy time.
I got
right?
you.
As opposed to saying, here are the action items that I am going to commit to
mm-hmm.
that create change.
Mm-hmm.
Because they can train more, but who's doing the training, right? They can hire better with better qualifications, but if the people that are still managing and training aren't doing it the right way, it's not going to change. And even bigger, if you bring in those newly hired people who have better backgrounds, have been better trained, mm-hmm. and they come into a culture where it's a macho culture, guys are about, violence is the cure-all, right? You clean up the streets through violence and through intimidation, like some police departments. You're just bringing these newly better educated and better trained officers into an environment that the environment's going to swallow them, and they're not going to be able to change. Because remember, think of it this way, and we talk about the bad apples in every police department, mm-hmm. and let's just say it's 1% or 2%. Okay. There's a reason why the other 98% aren't standing up and demanding change and doing things, right? And to me, that's the harder question to answer. What is it that's preventing the 98% from taking action to stop the only 2%? And you saw it in sports teams too, right? Mm-hmm. This dude's a knucklehead, mm-hmm. and he's messing things up for all of us, mm-hmm. but nobody really says anything or does anything for whatever reason. And so I'll ask you, ET, mm-hmm. How do you get that 98% mm-hmm. to change, to have the weight over the 2%, the 1 or 2%?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but in every championship level team, every quality team, they have leaders on the team that hold everybody else accountable, aside from the coach, aside from the GM, aside from, as you go up and right.
Right. Hopefully but you're right. That's what makes a championship team. Right. But there's 29 teams. There's 29 other teams all tied for last. Right.
But everybody still has to be able to go and act accordingly in order to, under some of the guidelines and rules that say somebody like Adam Silver set for everyone. So whether they're knuckleheads or not, if they fall out of line, then they're punished. And I think the problem is that right now, or what we're looking at when we're talking about police, it looks like they're going unpunished and have a license to do whatever they want to do.
I agree with you. Right? We're agreeing that mm-hmm. it's a problem and they're going unpunished. The question becomes, how do you get that culture? How do you get that person in charge? And how do you get it so they have the authority? The police chiefs have the responsibility to keep everybody in line and have everybody moving forward and doing things mm-hmm. the right way. But mm-hmm. they don't always have the authority to be able to get rid of those knuckleheads if they step out of line. And a lot of that has to do with the unions mm-hmm. and associations, right? And that's the challenge that really is underpinning a lot of these issues. Because I think 98% of people want to do it the right way and their heart's in the right place, but they just don't have the authority in order to make those changes. And so, like, when I talk to the chief of police now and before, right, they're like, Mark, we would change it in a heartbeat if we could. They don't want to deal with this shit, right? They don't want to face this. So how do we, as influencers, in one way or the other, try to get them to change? Right. I don't have that answer right now. I can talk till I'm blue in the face, and that's what I've done. Mm-hmm. I don't, I can say, here's who you should vote for, and here's who you shouldn't vote for. Mm-hmm. And that has a big influence as well. But there's such an ingrained, the history of police forces in this country and, mm-hmm. and how they tie back to slavery and, and trying to find slave, and then, in the early 1900s, they were immigrants that were put on the case, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a long period of ingrained challenges, right, that need cultural challenges that need to be overcome, particularly in urban police forces that have been very, very difficult, and so when we walk into this, I think we can't just say, okay, here's the questions, what are your answers, and expect to get results. Right. We've got to find a better way to dislodge, because, I'm not a union expert, a police union or association expert, but a lot of shit points back to the fact that it's very difficult to fire the people that aren't following the rules. And I don't know how we change that, but that's, I think, part of what we need to address. And I think part of that is the George Floyd law that's being proposed, and there's things built around part of that. But those are the conversations that when you talk to them, like when I talk, it's like, how do we change that? Because everything else they want to change. It's the things that they haven't been able to change that need changing the most, that have the big impact.
We're running into that same issue at Syracuse with the DPS, or the unions. That was just brought up. So it's very similar. When I say we started a group called the Black Oranges, and they're former Syracuse athletes. So I'm trying to use our collective power and influence to be able to help push for different things of accountability and things of that nature. So that's the correlation that I'm making. And I think that you're right as far as the unions part, and defining what the issue is, and then working with them, and then making suggestions as far as how they can improve relations and improve accountability. Because it's not just relations. There's not a lot of times the police departments, they say, okay, well, let's go into these schools and talk and officer friendly and all that stuff. That's all cool. But what people really want to be able to see is that if a police officer kills someone, they will be held accountable.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
That's really what it is.
Well, you want it so they don't kill anybody in the first place or hurt anybody in the first place, right?
Of course.
But yeah, but if the unfortunate happens and this tragedy happens again, and it will, right? Then, yeah, I mean, you can't have the immunity levels that officers have. It's just not the way it should work. There shouldn't be an automatic protection of them. Look, they should have every right afforded every American citizen, right to a fair trial, etc. But they shouldn't have more rights,
Exactly. Exactly. It should be above the law.
Yeah, it should be above the law. I just don't know how to change that. And that's, I'm open to all suggestions, because if you guys figure it out, or anybody figures out, let's share it and get it done. I just don't know.
Well, I definitely commend you. And like I told you when we was messaging each other, I commend you for being open to trying. I think that, you always started off by saying, look, I don't have as much power as you think I do. And I hear you on that, but you do have power, and you do have influence, and you are definitely an influencer. So I commend you for doing that. I think you brought up a good point when we were talking one time, and you said that the narrative is changing, and people need to know. You asked me, who should people look to as the leaders? And I thought that was a really good question. Because you said sometimes
Black Lives Matters, right?
Right. So explain to
leaders of Black Lives Matters.
Yeah, explain to me what you was asking and why people,
Well, I can tell you what I hear from white people.
Right.
Particularly from those who are in the Fox News bubble.
Okay.
Right. Is that they used to go to blacklivesmatters.com. And they would say, well, if you look at the leaders of Black Lives Matters, they're Marxists and they want to destroy the nuclear family, because that used to be, and they actually changed it. They were smart. They just changed the blacklivesmatter.com website, so it doesn't reflect those things anymore. But they would use that as a way to try to influence the narrative and really just reinforce that they don't want to deal with this problem within that little filter bubble that they're in. And so what was always brought up to me is that the people who invented the hashtag that ran blacklivesmatter.com must be the leaders, right? And if they're self-acclaimed Marxists, like they say in interviews and on that website, then the Black Lives Matters movement must be a Marxist movement. And if they say they don't support the traditional nuclear family, then the Black Lives Matters movement must be a bunch of Marxists that support, ending the nuclear family. And I'm like, that's crazy. Right. But it's crazy. I know it's crazy. Anybody who's supportive of the movement knows it's crazy. But it enables this filter bubble to dismiss Black Lives Matters movement. So I asked the question, who's the leader? Because there's nobody speaking up for BLM to talk about the movement. There's nobody going into that filter bubble to say that you're wrong, so that we get more support for the movement. Even if that support is recognizing that okay, it's not a Marxist movement led by 3 people who created the hashtag.
And we had a great conversation about this as well. And I told you that, you know, when we say Black Lives Matter, we're not talking about the organization. It's way so much bigger than that. I'll give you an example. So just last night, my wife, you remember Nicole? We just got engaged.
Of course.
Right. So we're married, 3 beautiful kids. And so last night, my wife was braiding my daughter's hair. And it's a long process, but when we sat down and we watched the Breonna Taylor story on Netflix. Great documentary. They did a great job with it. So afterwards, Imani's asking me questions. She was like, okay, so what's going to stop this from happening again? And she was like, so why doesn't her life matter as much, you know, enough for it to be valued? These are the questions that Imani's asking us, you know, where that the officer is held accountable for it. So she's asking me, all right, so what's going to happen to the officer? So what's going to stop another police officer from doing the same thing if they know they can get away with it? So then we explained to her what the police officer was charged with, and that it was wanton endangerment.
For missing. Yeah, for missing.
Right. And she was like, wait a minute, how can that be? And she was like, so that just tells us that our lives don't matter. So that's what we're saying when we say Black Lives Matter.
I know
I know you're saying we already had the conversation. I'm just saying that's what, so getting that message, because a lot of people, and I have heard people repeat what you said, and that can be further from the truth. So the people that I look at as the leaders and who I want to elevate as the leaders and keep pushing for the leaders, and I've been doing work with, are the family members of the victims of police brutality. Remember I told you about that. So I've been working with Emerald Gardner, who is Eric Garner's daughter. And, you know, I interviewed them all for my book. And ever since then, I was working with all of them. And Tiffany Crutcher, who is Terrence Crutcher's sister, and Eliza Castile and Valerie Castile, who is Philando Castile's mother and daughter. And, you know, even the Fultons, Trayvon Martin's family. And so they all are pushing for legislative changes, all of them in their respective cities. They're not pushing for, sensitivity training or being able to, they're not pushing for any of that, specifically legislative changes. And I want to push them as the leaders, as the people who have the most, being affected by all of this, because they have, they were personally affected. They actually lost a loved one. And I think that for some of the things, immediately when something happens, the cameras go to them because they get the immediate reaction after the police officer was found not guilty or the killing just happened. And then they all go away. All the cameras go away, but they're left to really be pushing for justice for their loved one. So that's what I really want to push them as the leaders.
That's great, right? To me, look, I can't be the one who decides that, right?
Yeah.
But I'll be supportive of anybody, because in this day and age with social media and just general media, the way it works, people consume information in short sound bites, little short videos, right? And there's so much volume of those things. You need somebody that is there speaking all the time in all the places where conversations are being held. Right. And in particular, it's not like you need to see them. It's not like I need to see them. It's the people that truly don't understand what's going on that need to see them. You need people who are going on Fox News. You need them going on to, Breitbart or wherever some of these places are, right? And really conveying what's at stake and why this is important. And that's not to say that, there's not going to be negative responses to some things. Because, look, the reality is, and this might come across as not being politically correct, when, like Charles Barkley said, right, if you're hanging out with a drug dealer, right, you are going to be at greater risk. Not that you deserve to be killed, not by a long shot. Not that the police officers don't deserve to be punished, not by a long shot. They were wrong in every way, shape, or form. But there's things you can do to not be in a position, just like, you tell your kids, or I'll tell my kids, right? There's certain things you don't do. And so there's always going to be a response, and there's got to be somebody who's there to respond to those things, that to create a conversation. And that's missing right now. And I hear exactly what you're saying. And all the people you mentioned that are, relatives of those who have been killed, they deserve a voice, but their voice has to be louder. And it takes, leadership comes from people who want to lead, people who want to communicate. And it's great that they're trying to work locally. That's amazing. Right. But there's got to be somebody with a bigger voice that's there all the time because this is a nonstop issue that's not going to go away. And it's, you don't want it to start to fade off because you go through a period of time where someone doesn't get killed, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want people to say, well, see, it hasn't been a problem for 6 months or 9 months, or it happened less this year than last year, because the underlying issue are the two big issues that aren't going away anytime soon, and that's racism and police reform. And so you need somebody there to continuously, hammer on these things and make the points and be the spokesperson and provide the information. Otherwise, you're not going to communicate with the people that really need to hear it.
And I think that one of the main issues is that you have people who are dedicated to misrepresenting the issues and dedicated to drowning the issues out. So that's a huge problem as well.
Oh, yeah, that's what they do. That's right. I mean, it's like, I'm not going to watch the NBA because you've got a Marxist organization represented on your basketball court. I'm like, dude, if this was about the website, you'd see a .com there, right? Do you see blacklivesmatter.com?
Right.
Do you see that stupid? If this was about the people who started the hashtag, they'd be in every ad, they'd be on every game talking. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's not what's happening. So we know it's not. We know it's disingenuous, right?
Right.
We know it's just a deflection because they don't want to deal with the underlying issue of racism. Mm-hmm. Because the reality is white people don't talk about racism and don't want to talk about racism.
Right.
You don't want to talk about white privilege because no one wants to think that they're privileged.
Right. Right.
Black people have no problem talking about racism. White people do. It's just very difficult. And so you get this deflection within those filter bubbles, and you need somebody or some people that go into those bubbles and say, no, you're wrong. And here's why you're wrong. And you're not going to convince most people because they're just going to, turn a blind eye to it. Mm-hmm. But if you get 5% or 10% and their kids don't become hate, don't receive the hate that they might otherwise would, or aren't educated hatefully, that's part of progress. But you need leaders. I mean, when we look back in history, right? John Lewis, Martin Luther King, whoever, we talk about leaders who have stood up and taken a position and taking on the risk to really move things forward. In 20 years, who are we going to look back at for BLM and said, you know what, they stood up for everybody when everybody needed someone to stand up for them.
And that's where I think just seeing the work that the family members have been doing, I think they can become those leaders.
I hope so.
Right,
and I'll help you any way I can to get them there, right?
Right.
I'll do anything I can to help you, to support you there. But it's got to happen, right? It's just got to happen.
And I appreciate your willingness to be able to do that. I want to ask you this. So I want to ask you, you had on your mind that you were going to run for president for a while, and then you kind of moved away from it. What made you move away from it? Something all of a sudden happened. Oh, your family. Yeah. Okay, well that makes sense.
There's 5 of us. I got 3 kids and my wife and me, and the vote was 4-1 against.
Oh, okay. Well, then that because you were talking about it for a while, and then I didn't hear it anymore at all. So that's what happened.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Interesting. So also you've been speaking a lot of different places and talking about politics, and you've always I interviewed you for my book We Matter, Athletes for Activism, and we talked a lot about your willingness to speak out against Trump. And we talked about that a lot in there. But a lot has happened even since then. But you originally, you were supporting Trump. And, you was complimentary of him. He was complimentary of you. It was like a whole bromance thing going on for a little while, right? But then...
No, I wouldn't go that far.
It was a little bromance going on, Mark. But then you changed. What caused the change?
So a couple of things. First of all, Donald Trump and I go back almost 20 years, right? When I first met Donald Trump, it was right after I had sold my company, and through a mutual friend, I got invited to a Super Bowl party down at Mar-a-Lago.
Okay.
And the place is beautiful, right? And so he's got this pool that overlooks the water, and I'm sitting there, it's just like a party, right? And so I'm sitting there at a table with one of the guys from Yahoo who bought our company and a guy who worked for a bank. And, like anybody a host would, walking around to all the guests. Okay. And so Donald Trump doesn't know me from Adam, walks up to the table, and there's this veranda where people in the club side of Mar-a-Lago were sitting. And he goes, "Hey, nice to meet you, Mark. Maybe someday you'll be sitting up there with the rich people." And I'm like, okay, Donald, whatever,
Okay.
So I didn't care one way or the other. It's no big deal.
Right.
And then I have a TV show that came on in 2004 on ABC called The Benefactor. He sent me a note saying, hey, congratulations. Oh, wait, I left out a part. So after that, he found out that I was involved in the internet, right? This is early days of the internet, and we were leaders in streaming. Okay. He invites me to his office. I'm like, okay, and he apologizes for what he said and all that. And he starts asking me these questions and brings in his internet guy. And it was all crazy shit. But the most interesting thing, because, there's a process of learning how to be famous, right? Okay. Where you go from nobody knowing who you are to lots of people knowing who you are to almost everybody knowing your name or knowing who you are, right? And I remember walking into his office, and when you go in there in Trump Tower, there's nothing but pictures of him on every inch of the wall. And I sent an email to my friends saying, look, if I'm ever famous, do not let me be this dude, right? and then in 2004, my show failed. The Apprentice kept on going, and he sent me a note. I don't forget exactly, literally a letter saying, your show was awful. You suck.
Really?
For real. And then in 2007, I started the first all high definition TV network called HDNet. Okay. And one of the things that we did was MMA fights. This is 13 years ago.
Okay.
And he was doing an MMA fight with the Russians, right?
The Russian people, right?
And there was this Russian fighter, Fedor Emelianenko, who was really good at the time. And they wanted to broadcast it on HDNet. And so long story short, I'm like, sure, I don't give a shit. So there's pictures of me with Donald Trump in 2007, fists up with this fighter, right?
Yep,
and Donald Trump on video saying, everything Marc Cuban touches turns to gold. That's why we won. So I went from, penthouse to outhouse to penthouse. Right. That's who Donald is, right?
Okay.
If you say something positive, he's your best friend. Right. So fast forward to 2015, and I'm thinking there's no chance he has to win. None. Right. He has no chance to win.
Right.
None.
Like everybody thought.
Like everybody thought. I'm like, Donald Trump's the best thing ever to happen to politics because he's not a typical politician. He just says what's on his mind. He's not a Stepford candidate.
Right.
And he saw that, and I was his best friend again.
Yeah.
Right. And so he would start calling me, and we would talk. But no matter what I talked to him about, he never could understand it. And no matter what I asked him about, he never got any smarter on it. And we're talking basic shit. I mean, real estate stuff. Like I remember asking him a real estate question about internal rate of return, and I could just tell he didn't understand it. Right. And I'm just like, and then I got to the point where it's like, Donald, at some point you have to learn this stuff. And I sent him an email saying just that, because I said something on CNN that said the guy never learns anything. I can't vote for him. He sent me a note saying, what happened? And I told him at some point you got to learn shit, right? You're talking about running the country, and now you have a chance to win. You literally have got to learn what you're doing. And that was the last I talked to him until after he got elected, and I was working on healthcare stuff, and he invited me back to the White House again. And so what actually Jared Kushner did, and he invited me into the Oval Office, which was hysterical. He's like, yeah, I know we had a little beef before, but I don't care anymore. But, and talking to him is an adventure. But anyway, so that's the answer to your question.
Okay, interesting. So, but now you're in this election, you've been on record saying that you're supporting Biden.
Oh yeah, hell yeah! I mean, I'll vote for a ham sandwich over Donald Trump.
So I was watching you on The View, and you were talking about the economic policies of the Republican Party that are a little bit more beneficial to someone.
Not what I said. Not complete. So that's not 100%.
All right, my bad. I didn't want to misquote you. You tell everybody what you said. What you
said was there may need to be some balance. That I might vote for some down ballot Republicans because one, I'm independent. I never vote straight party ticket on anything, right? Okay. And so they were giving me a hard time. How can I vote? And look, there's some economic issues coming from Biden. A lot of them I agree with. Some I disagree with because I think they're counterproductive to investment for all communities, not just minority communities. Okay. And so things like taking I'll give you an example. Like he wants to take, and most of his economic stuff, like no taxes over 400, no change in taxes if you make $400,000 or less, right?
Right.
That's me, right? Increasing corporate income taxes to 28%. That's fine too. I got no problem with that. But the one thing I think is a huge problem is he wants to take capital gains tax and make it equal to your regular income tax and tax it as regular income. And I'll tell you why that's bad. Capital gains is always taxed at a lower rate. It's been 21 or 25%, as low as 15%. Just it varies by administration. And in this range, that's all fine. I don't mind him raising it some.
Right.
But if you're paying 39 or 40% in income tax, like right now I pay 37%, I pay 39%. Let me give you an example of why that's bad. Let's just say I invest in 5 companies and I give them all $1 million. And 4 of them just run normally, right? They don't make a ton of money. One of them does really good and we sell it and I make $7 million. Well, if I've invested 5 and I'm not getting returns on those other 4, but I've created jobs, helped entrepreneurs, and they're running as normal businesses, employees and everything, but I don't really get returns, and that happens a lot, But now I've sold this one company for $7 million, where I'm making $7 million, but I'm only getting 60% of that. I'm only making $4.2 million back, right? And so now, as opposed to getting 8 times 7, 5.6 million. So it makes it harder when you're making decisions on investing. You're going to be a lot pickier. You're going to make a lot fewer investments because the chances of getting your money back are far less. That to me is a real problem because you want to see risk capital. You want, particularly when it's 0% interest rates, particularly if they're investing in minority communities. Like I just invested with a woman, Arlen Hamilton, where I gave her $6 million to invest in, people of color and LGBTQ individuals who are typically not recognized as and given the opportunity to get investment. I've invested over $50 million in minority owners and LGBTQ owners and women owners over the past 4 or 5 years. And so that changes the calculus of doing those types of investments.
On your return. I got you. I understand. And so mostly because the Republican party's ideals are a little bit different than Trumpism. You got to kind of put the two different, right? So they're very different, and he has kind of hijacked the party. So now it's his ideals and his. So with Trumpism, for a lot of people, a lot of conservatives, a lot of people on the right, economic issues outweigh the other issues. So what are some of the other issues that are deal breakers for you? So for instance, for me, I'm in the top tax bracket. I'm not Marc Cuban level, but I'm in the top tax bracket. But that's not enough for me to say, okay, since I'm getting a tax break here with the Republican, economic standpoint and the tax break plan, I can overlook the racism, the homophobia.
Oh no! Look, Biden right now.
No, I'm just saying, but a lot of people can. So what are the issues, the deal breakers for you that even though from an economic standpoint, it might be more beneficial for you to side more with the Republicans, why couldn't you not vote for Trump in this election?
Why could I not? Oh, everything.
Yeah, just in particular. Like,
the guy's an idiot, right? There's no leadership, right? No empathy, no ability to learn anything, no understanding of global politics, no understanding of technology, no ability to talk to people who don't agree with them, no ability to hire good people and listen to them. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. He's just incapable, and that's the problem. Now, do I understand why people vote for him? I think there's 2 types of people, right? One are the people who just vote their pocketbook, period, end of story. Right. And I understand it. I don't like it, but I understand it. And it's kind of hypocritical for me to say, okay, you shouldn't vote your pocketbook, right? Because it's not, I'm going to be fine either way.
Right.
And the second is, if you're one of these people who think the country's coming to an end, right? That everybody's out to get you. The pedophiles in Hollywood are out to get you, right? You're a QAnon person. The elites, whoever they are out to get you, right? China's out to get us. Russia's out to get us. Everybody. And the only person who can stand up to all the people out to get us is Donald Trump.
Right.
Because, that narrative on Biden has been, he can't stand up to China. What has he done? Da 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 da.
Right.
If you believe all that narrative, you're going to vote for Trump. No, I think that's craziness, but that's what. Again, people in a filter bubble. I mean, you go on Facebook, you see the shit on Facebook.
Right.
I mean, it's some of the most ridiculous shit ever.
Yeah.
Ever. And people believe it. And you try to talk to them and say, and I say, look, I know the guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he cares about America. He puts America first. I'm like, Donald Trump never gave a care about a motherfucker other than himself. He would throw his family under the bus.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They don't listen. They, you know, because again, there's just nobody, even on the Democratic side, there's nobody in the middle talking to those people.
Right.
You know, to try to get them to understand otherwise. So we all stay in our little social media filter bubble, you know, thinking that what we see and hear is right. Like I saw somewhere on television the other day, or maybe it was online, where they were interviewing Trump supporters.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they were talking about the fact that, you know, the FBI said that QAnon was one of the greatest domestic terrorist threats. And the guy says, you know, he talks to a QAnon supporter, and the guy says, of course they're going to say that. You know, we know where all the bodies are buried in the FBI, so they're trying to hide. I mean,
it's ridiculous. You know, I was watching you on Sean Hannity, and I compliment you for going on Sean Hannity, even though you know,
right? That's where you got to go.
Yeah, but it's tough because Sean Hannity has this way. He asks you questions and then doesn't let you answer. So
of course,
we're right. But so he asked you a question a couple of times. You were talking about the coronavirus, and then he cut you off in the middle and said, "You're like, you didn't even get your point out yet." Then he cut you off again, and I was just like, "Let Mark answer the question that you just asked him."
Yeah, you know, it's not making the sausage is never pretty, right? And when you go to the other side where you know everybody disagrees with you.
Right.
You got to fight a little harder, and you got to be repetitive a little bit more, and you got to have the quick one-liners, right? But that, you know, you're not going to get many, but, you know, 77,000 people were the difference between Trump winning and losing across 3 states.
Right.
If I can do it enough and get 77,000 people to change their mind, the right 77,000, maybe it makes a difference. So I don't mind getting the shit. And boy, the emails I get, oh my
I can imagine.
God. You're talking about racist motherfuckers.
I can imagine. But let me ask you this, because you didn't get a chance to fully explain yourself on there before he was trying to cut you off and everything like that. So and let me ask you, if Trump would have, because his point, what Sean Hannity's point was saying that, you know, Trump did this great job in saving New York. That's what he wanted to get you to say. And I was like, he's really pushing hard and trying to make you say those words. But correct me if I'm wrong, though. If Trump hadn't had, you know, called it a hoax in the beginning, not paid attention to it in the beginning, and we're going back to like February and going back to the rallies where he's urging people that it's just, you know, he said it's just
want to go away.
Democratic hoax. You know, it's the liberals who want to just destroy me. Like that's the coronavirus was, you know, discovered or created to destroy him. Like that's how narcissistic he is. But if he didn't do all of that and paid attention to it back then, wouldn't that have been better for the entire economy? Wouldn't that would have been better for the entire, you know, we're at 200,000 deaths right now? I mean,
now, if everybody committed to wearing a mask right now, 2 seconds from now, everybody put on a mask every time they went out, we'd be able to open things up and the economy would improve. Now realize that when you you should get this one dude on. He's an economist from Harvard called Chetty, Chetty.
Okay.
And look up his stuff. The stuff's phenomenal.
Okay.
And he talks about decay recovery. For you and I, the recovery's pretty much back, right? Because we can live our lives. We can go online and get what we need and do what we need to do. And we work online, right? We deal in the digital world.
Right.
For those people who are the essential workers, right?
Oh, definitely.
The people. Their unemployment rate is 16%.
Definitely.
Their economy is awful right now.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, if everybody wore a mask, their economy is going to improve significantly because, and their health is going to improve significantly because as essential workers, they're not going to be nearly as at risk. Now, one of the overall challenges, though, that nobody's addressing is the economy as a whole is becoming more and more digital. We're accepting digital a lot more readily than we did, you know, a year ago. Mm-hmm. And that's changing the economy. And so, you know, people aren't coming to sporting events. They're not going on trips. They're not going to concerts. They're not staying, you know, in hotels as much. right? So the question becomes, is the change that's happened and taken us away from them, is that better in the long term for the economy or worse? Because you're seeing a lot of small businesses close, but a lot of that business has gone online. And so small businesses who have closed retail have more been created online because anybody with a laptop and an internet connection can, go on Shopify or Amazon and create a business. Are we ahead, and are we going to be better off, or are we worse off? And I don't know the answer to that right now, but that's a question we aren't really exploring. They call that creative destruction. You don't try to keep the horse and buggy businesses or the record labels or the records or the CD businesses around because things have moved forward. Is that what's happening right now? What's the impact on different communities?
Well, it's interesting because I find it interesting that, that Trump was convincing people in red states, that his supporters, these are his people, to open up early. And, Texas, Oklahoma, my family's from Tulsa. And, he said, I want everybody to open up by Easter. That was the time that he was saying. And then so you see all these red states opening up. Again, these are his supporters and his people. Then you see the numbers increasing. Then you see all the things, different things. Then he's pushing for everything to open back up. So then he's forcing people who aren't really that confident in the safety.
What makes that worse is southern states, red states like that, haven't adopted the Medicaid option for the ACA, for Obamacare.
Right. Because he wants to do away with Obamacare.
Right. So what's happening is not only are more people getting sick, right, even though the percentage is lower than it used to be, right, more people and absolute numbers are getting sick, they have no place to go for overall health care, right? So yeah, they can get tests, they can get some care because they're not charging for all of the COVID stuff. They're charging for some, but generally these are the states that, one, don't have access to Medicaid, which is crushing people that don't have that aren't well off or even decent off financially. And two, of course, these are the states with the worst education in the union, right? In the United States, right? So they're more susceptible to all this nonsense. And on top of that, because their education is so much weaker than other states, the kids that can't get to school don't have the resources, and the schools don't have the resources to open up correctly. So they're not getting the education. They're not, and I don't have absolute data for this, but just anecdotally, that's what we're seeing.
But he's pushing for them to be open. See, here in Maryland, we're all closed. All our schools are virtual. You know what I mean? But down in Oklahoma, I talked to my friends, they're all open. And
they're open too.
That's crazy right now. You know what I mean?
It is, right? Honestly, like the schools that are well off, my kids, right? Private schools, masks, social distancing, we can afford and the schools there to make sure it's done right. And they're actually safer. Public schools are a different beast, right? And that's the point. And that's the point, right? They don't have the resources in order to do all this right. Now, the good news is, if there is good news, is kids aren't quite as susceptible, and teachers are terrified enough that they're doing everything they can to protect themselves. And so the number of cases hasn't been as astronomical as they could have been. But at the same time, we don't know the long-term implications of just catching COVID.
And that's the issue. That's my issue with college football. That's a whole different issue. We don't have to go down that route.
Here's what you're telling me, T. So one of the, and someone just told me this, so I'm just relaying. I can't take credit for it.
Okay.
One of the things that happens to almost all people that get COVID is that they lose their sense of taste and smell, right?
Right.
And it's everybody looks at that as being no big deal.
Right.
Well, what controls your sense of taste and smell? Your brain. Their neurological systems control that. So by definition, if you had your taste or smell eliminated for some period, COVID has had a neurological impact on your brain, on your body, right?
Definitely.
So we don't know what the long-term implications of even that are. And so it's not just about the fatality rate, it's about the impairment rate, and we don't know what the long-term implications of that are at all.
And that's
all we know. Yeah.
That's a big question mark. All right, I'm going to get two more questions and I'm going to let you out of here. I promise you. I'm looking at Trump, and I've asked one more question about Trump, but I'm looking at, and you correct me if my interpretation of this is wrong, okay? So if someone intentionally avoids paying their federal income taxes, right? No, let's just say, hypothetically, I guess, right? And they're actually inflating their revenues and their assets, on actual bank documents. and they actually receive loans, right? Wouldn't that be bank fraud and tax evasion?
Well, good for you, Greg. Good for you going that direction. So the stuff that came out in the New York Times yesterday did not suggest that he broke the law with his taxes.
Okay.
Right? Did not, because they talked about tax avoidance. Avoidance is okay. Evasion is not.
Right.
People get thrown in jail for tax evasion. But to your point, right? If I show you income taxes that aren't quite, in order to get a loan, and those numbers aren't quite right, because you fudge even just a little bit and inflate them at all. That's bank fraud. That's why Michael Cohen went to jail.
Right.
Because he went to jail and he didn't even try to inflate it. Right. They just got him by saying it wasn't 100% accurate. He didn't even inflate them. Right. And so if Donald Trump, I think they said they own 262 million that was due in the next year or next few years. Right. And there was only one bank that would loan to him, that's Deutsche Bank.
Right.
And Deutsche Bank is under investigation. They've paid $1 billion+ in fines.
Right.
And so if the feds find that Donald Trump inflated on his tax returns asset valuations, or tried to tie back in his application to the bank to get a loan, faulty numbers that were in his tax forms, that's breaking the law. And you can go straight to jail. That's how they got Al Capone.
Right. There we go. All right. Just wanted to make sure that I was clear.
Yeah, you got that right. You got that right.
Okay. Last question for you. The year you won the championship, it was a great year. Y'all had a great team. A lot of guys from the Wizards was there. I was happy seeing y'all, win the championship. You had to smile from ear to ear the whole time, right? It was great. I want to ask you this though. LeBron James gets a lot of criticism for that series in particular. And I want to ask you, what is the difference that you see in him then in that series and then in him now? Because if you had to just compare certain differences, what are some of the differences that you see?
Yeah. So number one, he was the number 2 guy with the Heat, right? It was Dwayne Wade that really was the leader, like we talked earlier about having that leader in the locker room, right?
Right.
So you could really tell on the court and just from talking to guys that, he went to Dwayne's team, right? It wasn't like, Dwayne came to his team.
Right.
And so I think one is leadership. Now LeBron's that guy, period, end of story, right? He says who comes on that team, how it's going to work, what we're doing. And 2, he's got the basketball IQ level now. He's a basketball savant. Right. I mean, the way he sees and reads what's going on the court in real time and is 3 steps ahead is incredible. And that's what makes him, in addition to his athleticism, that's really what makes him special. And so he didn't have that. Like, we would run a zone against him and he would hesitate and not be sure what to do.
Right.
He's not going to hesitate now. Right. He knows exactly what's coming and what to do and anticipates. He can talk to you about a basketball game and every single play that's happened. Like some of us might talk about a book we just read. Right. And that those 2 things are enormous differences. And he can now beat you in so many different ways. He's still athletic enough. He's still, his skill set has improved, his passing, but those all tie back to his basketball IQ, and that's something that wasn't as developed then as it is now.
Okay, fair enough. Hey, well, Mark,
didn't we?
No, we covered everything. That's what I like. I talk about a lot here. So, I don't know if you've ever talked about that range of topics in one segment, one interview. So, hey, I appreciate you sitting down with me. And I want to say honestly, I really do commend you for wanting and trying to be able to move the needle with this entire issue with police brutality and police, accountability and everything. So I definitely commend you.
I'm learning, ET. I've still got a long way to go. I've come a long way over the last 4 or 5 years, 6 years. There's just things that sometimes you're slow on, right? Because it was foreign to me in a lot of respects, right. Understanding race, understanding what, African Americans and minorities in general have to go through, understanding, what happens with the police force and the talks and just things that are so foreign to what white people have to deal with. And right. So,
because it's not your reality. You don't have to deal with it.
It's not reality. Yeah. Right. You just don't. And right. So, it just took me some time. And I realized that right now we're just talking, right? And there's still a long ways to go and a lot to do. So, I'm going to do my best to keep on learning and trying to be supportive.
That's good stuff. Well, I appreciate you. So you stay safe down there in Dallas, and good luck to you with everything. Don't listen to Trump. Don't listen to Trump. Keep your mask on.
You already know the answer there.
All right, have a good one, Mark.
All right, Tom, take care. Tell Nicole I said.
All right, cool. I will. Peace.